After discovering my wife's betrayal during a vacation, I took matters into my own hands. I sabotaged everything: our home, our relationship, and left her behind. Shannon and I met during our sophomore year in college. From the moment we met, there was an undeniable connection. She was beautiful, thick brown hair, bright blue eyes, and a body that turned heads. But it wasn't just her looks that captivated me, it was her personality. Smart, cheerful, and full of life, Shannon was the woman I could talk to for hours, laugh with, and just be myself. We became best friends and, after a few months, shared an unforgettable moment in my car behind the baseball stadium. It was clumsy but perfect. When we finally kissed, she cried, tears of joy. And from that moment, I knew she was the one for me. I'm Stu, a contractor from a small Midwestern town. I stand at 6 feet tall, weigh 187 pounds, with brown eyes and sandy hair. I run a successful remodeling business, while Shannon teaches music at a local high school. Together, we've built a comfortable life, and we're even planning to start a family soon. The first decade of our marriage was blissful, our sex life fulfilling, even though it wasn't every day. We had one rule: we always cuddled before bed. Waking up next to Shannon was always a joy, and I would have done anything for her without hesitation. But then, something happened that shook me to my core. Like most of my work, the busier seasons took place in the warmer months. So Shannon and I would take vacations during the holidays, often heading somewhere warm to escape the winter chill. During one such winter, we decided to book a 2-week stay at an all-inclusive spa resort in the Bahamas, hoping it would help us reconnect. But as soon as we arrived, things began to unravel. Before boarding the plane, I noticed something unsettling. A man kept staring at Shannon at the airport. His familiarity with her set off alarms, though they didn't exchange words. Shannon seemed oblivious to the tension, which only added to my unease. On the plane, I noticed something else. She chose the aisle seat, unusual for her, as she usually prefers the window. When I questioned her, she said it was because of a stomach issue. I didn't buy it. I switched seats with someone so she could be more comfortable, but the knot in my stomach only grew tighter. I couldn't sleep on the plane, despite being exhausted. My anxiety kept me awake, and I kept a close eye on Shannon. After a while, she got up to use the restroom, and that's when I saw her interact with the man. A brief touch on his shoulder. The body language said it all. There was a closeness, an intimacy. My heart sank. How could she betray me like this? I spent the rest of the flight in a daze, hoping I was just imagining things. But as we boarded the plane to Nassau, I saw him again, seated just a few rows behind us, engrossed in his book. Shannon returned to her usual seat by the window, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. When we arrived at the resort, I did my best to hide the growing doubt in my mind. Shannon was glued to her phone during the drive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Just texting my mom and sister, she reassured me, but that didn't quiet my suspicions. I needed to know for myself. In the hotel room, I tried to reconnect. I kissed her neck, told her how much I loved her, but her response was distant. Her words didn't match her eyes. "I love you too, baby," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I know, Stu," she whispered, avoiding my gaze. That was when it hit me I was losing her. Not long after, she excused herself to the bathroom, claiming she got her period and forgot her tampons. It wasn't unusual for her to forget things, but this felt different. Was she just avoiding me? The doubt gnawed at me. I couldn't stop myself from going through her phone. What I found shattered everything. Texts between Shannon and a man named Anthony, filled with flirtation and lies. confirmed my worst fears. Stu is asleep. I liked your squeeze. One text read. Another. I need more than what Stu can give. Anger surged in my chest, but I decided not to confront her just yet. I'd let her deal with the consequences of her actions. The sting of her betrayal was sharp, but I was just getting started. What was supposed to be a trip to reconnect would now become a nightmare for both her and Anthony. I started recording them by the pool, capturing their intimate moments. I was done playing the good husband. She had crossed a line, and now it was my turn. Later, I overheard Shannon making plans with Anthony. It was clear she intended to spend the entire trip with him. I couldn't just sit by and let that happen. I took her phone and devised a plan. I wasn't just going to expose her affair. I was going to ruin this vacation for both of them. For hours, I followed them, documenting their every move. Shannon had no idea what I was up to. I was playing it cool, waiting for the right moment. When I saw them leave for Anthony's room that night, I knew the time had come. I followed, capturing the evidence I needed to destroy them. What happened next was unforgettable. The pain of betrayal fueled my every move. I wasn't just planning on divorce. I was going to make her regret ever crossing me. I needed a way to keep Shannon occupied, and a spa day seemed perfect. I booked it under the guise of a loving gesture, masking my true intentions. If she hesitated, I'd remind her that the package was non-refundable, just as she had done to me countless times before. With her out of the way, I could finally confront Anthony. I lay awake plotting, the weight of the situation settling in. Around 5 a.m., Shannon quietly slipped into bed beside me. I pretended to sleep, waiting for the right moment. By 7 a.m., she was still asleep. So I slipped out, booked her spa appointment, and planned my next move. When I returned around 9 a.m., she was still asleep. I took the opportunity to check her phone again. One message stood out. You were great last night. Any chance you could escape Stu for some afternoon fun? My heart raced with fury, but I remained calm. I kissed her forehead. Good morning, sleepyhead, I said softly. I'm sorry about last night. I've got a surprise for you. She stirred, looking uncertain. What kind of surprise? She asked. I booked you a spa day. It's an apology for yesterday, and a way to show you how much I love you. Her eyes flickered with doubt, but she smiled faintly. No, I like it. I just wish you'd asked me first. I played along, assuring her it was a nice surprise, even though I knew the real reason was much darker. After a quick visit to the bathroom, I glanced out the window and saw Anthony by the pool, talking to two women. He wasn't even pretending to be bothered by my surprise. It was clear he knew exactly what I was up to. At breakfast, Shannon barely touched her food. Feeling okay, babe? Is it your period? I asked. Yeah, I'm just not hungry, she replied, distracted. Her behavior only confirmed my suspicions, but it didn't matter. My plan was unfolding perfectly. After breakfast, Shannon wanted to return to the room for a nap. I continued my walk on the beach, running into the two women I'd seen with Anthony earlier. They were with two men, clearly trying to act casual. Anthony had already claimed them. Back at the hotel, I feared Shannon might skip her spa appointment to meet Anthony. I searched the hotel grounds, eventually finding myself outside his room. I didn't hear Shannon, but I heard voices. Taking a deep breath, I set up a hidden camera outside his window, patiently waiting. The two women eventually left his room, all smiles, as if they'd shared a secret. I grabbed the camera and returned to my room to review the footage. What I saw confirmed everything. I now had undeniable proof of his actions. I duplicated the footage and sent one copy to my brother, just in case things went south. With the plans set in motion, I needed to stay ahead of them. I arranged to have a copy of the footage sent to my brother's house for safekeeping, just in case. I also made sure Shannon and Anthony's routine would align, ensuring I'd be ready to execute my revenge. As the evening approached, Shannon returned from the spa, glowing with satisfaction. "Thank you so much, Stu. I feel like a whole new person," she said, and I smiled, masking the bitterness inside. After dinner, she began getting ready for her evening with Anthony. As she headed to the bathroom, I seized the opportunity to check her messages again. "I can't wait to be with you tonight," Shannon's text read, and my anger flared. It was time to take action. I slipped away, tailing them to the bar, and once there, I made my move. I spiked their drinks, ensuring they'd fall unconscious before heading back to his room. As they drank and laughed, I waited, praying the pills would take effect. When the clock struck midnight, they hurried off to Anthony's room, unaware of the storm I'd just set in motion. I quickly followed, staying a few steps behind. As they reached the door to Anthony's room, Shannon began to stumble. Anthony struggled to keep her steady, but they managed to get inside. Once they were in, I waited a few minutes before retrieving the key card from Shannon's purse. I entered the room, where I found Anthony struggling to rouse Shannon. "What's wrong with you, baby? You didn't drink that much," he slurred. I smirked and replied, "Just her husband. Now, be a good boy and pass out." As expected, Anthony collapsed onto the floor, unconscious. I spotted his phone nearby, picked it up, and began scrolling through it. I found a folder full of photos. Most were innocuous, but then I found something far more revealing. Pictures of women in various states of undress, some engaging in intimate acts. Among them were several of Shannon, along with some of her colleagues and even wives of her male coworkers. Well, this is interesting," I muttered. It seemed Anthony had a thing for married women. I decided to share these photos with everyone in his contact list. When he got home, his life would be turned upside down. I forwarded the pictures to Shannon's phone, then transferred them to mine as insurance before powering down his device. I then started packing up Anthony's belongings, clothes, toiletries, and more, stowing everything neatly into his suitcase. I rifled through his pockets, confiscating his cash, credit cards, and passport, knowing it would make it difficult for him to leave the island. With his suitcase packed, I turned to Shannon. Still asleep on the bed, I carefully rolled her onto her back and carried her to our room. After laying her down, I returned to Anthony's room to collect the last of his things, including his phone, wallet, and cash as compensation for the trouble he'd caused. I even removed his shoes and, on my way out, tossed them and the suitcase into a hotel dumpster, covering them with trash. By the time I returned to my room, it was nearing 4 a.m. I packed my things and went through Shannon's purse, empty of money, credit cards, and a passport. My plan was to leave her with nothing but the clothes on her back. I had one more task before I could leave. I slipped out of the room, grabbed the DVR discs I'd recorded earlier, and slipped one under each of the doors of the two women and their partners. As I returned to my room, I gave Shannon one last sorrowful glance before packing her things into her suitcase. By 7 a.m., I was ready. I took Shannon out to the pool to avoid her being there when housekeeping arrived. Back in the room, I grabbed my suitcases and double-checked everything. I still had Anthony's phone, and I had one last idea. Returning to the pool, I took Shannon's phone and began sending the photos and videos to everyone in her contact list, sparing only her young nieces. Her parents, siblings, and colleagues would find them enlightening. At the front desk, I requested tape to cover the contacts on Shannon's phone battery, making it appear dead. I made sure she didn't have a charger, knowing it would take her a while to get it working. Just after 8 a.m., I heard shouting outside. Apparently, one of the boyfriends of the women Anthony had been with was furious after watching the video I slipped under their door. "Tell your family the wedding's off. I never want to see you again," one of the men shouted at his girlfriend. The other man coldly replied to his pleading girlfriend, "Go to your new boyfriend. Maybe he has more money, but I doubt he'll be as forgiving." I wondered what would become of Anthony, but I didn't have to wait long. Soon, I heard the sirens of an ambulance outside the building. Poor Anthony, the man I had assumed was the manager, stepped out of his office and quickly motioned for the orderlies to follow him down the hall toward Anthony's room. I couldn't help but feel a bit of hope that everything would be okay as a crowd of onlookers began to gather. Curious about the commotion, I quietly hailed a taxi and headed toward the airport. When I powered on my phone, I saw I had a voicemail. It was from my brother Frank. "Stu, what's going on? I've been getting flooded with explicit photos and videos of Shannon. I mean, I know she's attractive, but what's the deal? Let me know when you get a chance." I called him back while waiting to board the flight and filled him in how Shannon had been involved with Anthony while we were away, how things had gone wrong with their attempts at conceiving. At first, Frank thought I was joking, but after urging him to take a look at the evidence, he sympathized and offered his help. Once the call ended, I boarded the plane alone, thoughts spinning in my head. When I landed, I checked Anthony's phone. Dozens of threatening voicemails and messages awaited me, many aimed directly at him. The photos and videos had clearly made an impact. After retrieving my luggage and getting my car from long-term parking, I drove home. Divorce crossed my mind, but it didn't sit right with me. Splitting our assets felt unfair, especially given Shannon's betrayal. It didn't seem right that she could cheat and still profit from a divorce. As I drove, a new plan took shape in my mind. Shannon had destroyed our marriage. Now it was her turn to pay. Once home, I called Frank for help moving my things out of the house, ensuring that Shannon would return to an empty home. My phone buzzed. Over 20 new voicemails and a dozen messages, most from Shannon's relatives, wondering where she was and why she hadn't responded. There wasn't a single message from Shannon herself. She hadn't realized the extent of what had happened yet. I couldn't help but smile at the thought of her reaction when she saw the flood of texts about the videos. She was in for a rude awakening. I got to work immediately. First, I canceled all our credit cards and transferred the remaining balance from our joint account into my personal one. Then, I started gathering my things. Gifts Shannon had given me over the years? Gone unless they were valuable, in which case, I sold them or pawned them. By 11 p.m., I checked my phone again. Shannon had managed to get hers working. Her first few messages were full of concern, asking where I was. But as she started to piece things together, her tone shifted. "Why did you do this to me? Couldn't we have talked first?" I ignored the rest of her messages. There was no need to respond. The next day, I was on the move. Unsure of when Shannon would return, I acted quickly. I bought boxes to pack up our belongings, rented a warehouse to store them, and then drained our joint bank account, moving everything into my business account. Before I left for good, I made some changes to the house. Using my knowledge of construction, I set up a few surprises, nothing too obvious at first glance. By the time my brother Frank arrived with his truck to help move my things, I was nearly done. I told him I was leaving and wouldn't be filing for divorce. When Shannon returned, I'd be gone. She could keep the house, but that was all she'd get from me. Frank wasn't thrilled, but he knew there was no point in arguing. Once I'd made up my mind, there was no changing it. He left, cautioning me to think carefully. That evening, I finished the house modifications. A snowstorm that was forecasted worked in my favor, giving me extra time to complete everything. For the next 2 days, Shannon's desperate calls kept coming. She begged for forgiveness, her voice increasingly frantic. I stayed calm, offering just enough hope to keep her on the line. When she finally mentioned she would be home soon, I prepared for her arrival. She asked if I would meet her at the airport, but I declined, saying I had errands to run. Instead, I arranged for my neighbor to record her return as a surprise. The next morning, I sold my work truck, bought a new one under a friend's name, and made arrangements to leave. I contacted a former college buddy in Colorado who had offered me work in the past. No questions asked, he agreed to take me on. Everything was set. Shannon kept calling, pleading for forgiveness, but by then, I had already started my journey south. A fresh start. When Shannon called to confirm her return, I told her I wouldn't be at the airport. I gave her instructions to have her sister pick her up instead. By the time she arrived, I'd be long gone, starting a new life. I had planned for my wife the following: house collapse. I was only an hour away from my friend's house in Colorado when I got a frantic call from Shannon. The house. It collapsed. It just caved in on itself. It must have been the snow. She was hysterical. I barely put the key in the lock when suddenly there was this loud crash. The roof collapsed. "Oh God, our house is gone," she cried. "Well, Shannon, don't fret," I said cheerfully. "I'm sure your parents are still waiting for you. As for me, I've taken other measures." "What do you mean?" "Our house is destroyed." "How can you be so calm about this?" she snapped. I couldn't help but chuckle. My renovations went exactly as planned. I rigged it so the house would collapse when you unlocked the door. The front door lock was connected to a switch that activated a winch, and I used a pulley system to take down the supports. Once you turned the key, everything went down. It wasn't the snow. It was me, just like you were with our marriage. There was silence on the other end. Then her voice quivered. "What have you done? Best of luck finding a new home," I added before hanging up. I reset my phone and called my neighbor. "Stu, you won't believe it. The house collapsed, must have buckled under the snow, but there wasn't enough snow for that much damage. Luckily, I have it all on tape. Your wife was trying to open the door when it happened, and bam, the whole place just fell in. I'll need that video when you can." After our conversation, I powered off my phone and continued my journey toward my new life. It's been almost 3 years since then. I've built a comfortable life for myself here in Colorado, staying in touch with a few friends back in Minnesota. I've avoided family contact, knowing they would just pass on my location to Shannon. It seems Shannon got what she wanted. She's pregnant with Anthony's child. At first, she claimed it was mine, casting me as the neglectful father who ran away. Sadly, even my mother believed her, eager to have a grandchild. But I didn't let it slide. I had a friend contact my brother and suggest a DNA test. When the results came in, my mother expelled Shannon from the house, denouncing her and her illegitimate child. As for Anthony, it seems he's paid the price. He was severely injured by 2 men at the resort and spent over a week in the hospital. After he returned home, several other men, ex-husbands, it seemed, were waiting to confront him. He's since left town, but rumors suggest he's now impotent, his days of promiscuity over.